Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Feeling overwhelmed is normal sometimes. Everybody gets overwhelmed at one point or another. The problem becomes when you're overwhelmed a lot of times, when it becomes frequent. But whether or not your experience of feeling overwhelmed is something that happens every now and again, or something that happens on a far too regular of a basis, the good news about this is that there are things that you can do to help you feel better and to help you to move out of that feeling of being overwhelmed. As with anything else, of course, you have to be proactive. Take the time and the effort to do something about it in order to change your situation. A lot of people have a lot going on at work, so it's no surprise that sometimes you can feel overwhelmed. Maybe there are too many responsibilities or projects on your plate, too many to-do things on your to-do list, and maybe too many problems for you to handle. Maybe everything is marked as a priority as people are coming at you looking for a solution. Whatever the case may be, it's normal to feel overwhelmed sometimes. But what can you do to tackle feeling overwhelmed? What can you do to address it head on? First things first, make a list of things that make you feel overwhelmed. What is it that makes you feel overwhelmed? Maybe it's just one thing, one situation, or maybe it's a list of things. So first things first, make a list of what makes you feel overwhelmed. The next thing to do is to prioritize the list. You can prioritize the list in a couple of ways, and I suggest that you combine these two things. One, prioritize the list by what is most stressful to you. What is making you feel overwhelmed the most? So maybe things that are most overwhelming would go at the very top of your list, and then work your way down to things that are less overwhelming. And whatever's in the last place on your list would be what makes you feel overwhelmed the least. The second point of prioritization to that list would have to do with how easy is it to address that particular issue. So things that can be resolved fairly easily could get a higher number in terms of priority than things that would take a lot longer to resolve. So your list of priorities would have essentially two categories or two ways of labeling each item. How much is it stressing you out or making you feel overwhelmed? And how easy it is to tackle this particular thing so that you can reduce or remove the overwhelm altogether. If your list of what makes you feel overwhelmed has multiple things on it, it's important to point out that you should address one thing at a time. Part of being overwhelmed for many people involves doing too many things at once or trying to accomplish too many things all at once. So as you tackle a list of what makes you feel overwhelmed, address each item one at a time and don't worry about the other items while you're focusing on that one thing. Of course, things that make you feel overwhelmed are by their very nature overwhelming. So it's important to look at whatever is overwhelming you, that one thing that you're examining at a time, and break it down into smaller pieces so that the parts can each be addressed without being so overwhelming. This may sound like a very straightforward and logical bit of advice, and it is, but you would be surprised how many people who have been stuck in that state of overwhelm overlook that particular step of breaking down the bigger issue into smaller parts so that it is more manageable and easier to address. As you work on your list of things that make you feel overwhelmed, remember that this list is not written in stone. This is something that should be revisited and revised on a regular basis. As you're chipping away at this list and getting rid of things that make you feel overwhelmed, then you should update your list and get those things off the list so that they're not there as a reminder to you of feeling overwhelmed. And of course, if there are other things that make it to your list, that's something to add in there so that you can properly address them too. It's also important that you realize that not every problem is solvable, meaning that there are some things where it's best to accept they are what they are, and rather than trying to beat your head against the wall, maybe it's more productive to find a way around some things or simply accept them for what they are and make peace with them. Of course, this is just a general statement, and different situations will require different ways of approaching them. But it is important to point out that there are some things where it becomes counterproductive and wasteful of your time and energy even to try to resolve them or make them something that they're never going to be. So that's why your ability to recognize that and find ways of either making peace with it and accepting it or find ways around it is so important. Sometimes we become overwhelmed by things that may be on our list but no longer need to be there. Things that maybe once meant something or needed to be as part of our responsibilities or part of our lists of things to do, but they no longer need to be there. They don't even need to be on our radar anymore. So it's important that you take a look at your list and clean it up. Be willing to let go of what can be let go of, rather than carrying extra baggage that does nothing other than add to your feelings of overwhelm. Why carry that extra baggage if it's no longer even really in the picture? And of course, as part of dealing with feeling overwhelmed and the state of overwhelm, it's important that you engage in proper self-care. And proper self-care has a number of different components with it, which of course include things like proper diet and exercise and rest and disconnecting from your job on a daily basis and finding things that you enjoy and engaging in things that lift your spirit and make you happy. So make sure that one of the things that you do as you tackle this feeling of being overwhelmed is that you take care of yourself, because self-care is critical when it comes to dealing with things like overwhelm or stress or any other feelings like that. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Feeling overwhelmed sometimes is quite normal because we're all busy and we all have many different responsibilities and many different things that we have to complete, that we have to get done. Of course, when feeling overwhelmed becomes a regular feeling, that becomes a problem. But whether you feel overwhelmed on a regular basis or every now and then, there are things that you can do to help you feel better and reduce the likelihood of being overwhelmed. Making a list of things that make you feel overwhelmed is the first step. You have to know what's affecting you before you can address it. Give that list a couple of different types of priorities. First, figure out what's overwhelming you the most, and then figure out which of the things on your list can be tackled first. Because the quicker you take care of every item on your list, the shorter your list becomes, and the fewer things that exist in your experience that can make you feel overwhelmed. Tackle each thing one at a time. Part of being overwhelmed for many people is trying to do too many things at once. So as you look at your list of things that make you feel overwhelmed, address each one of those one at a time. And make sure that when you're addressing these things that make you feel overwhelmed one at a time, you also take the time to break them down into smaller pieces. So each thing can be broken down into smaller, less stressful or less intimidating, more manageable tasks. Remember that not every problem has a solution, or perhaps not the solution that you're looking for. So be willing to accept some things for what they are, or learn to find a way around them. And remember that some things, which may still be on your list of things that make you feel overwhelmed, may not even need to be there anymore. Just because something made you feel overwhelmed in the past doesn't mean that it belongs anywhere in your life anymore. It may not need to be there at all. So make sure that you look at that list, update it and revise it and clean it up as necessary. As the week unfolds, I encourage you to examine how often you get overwhelmed by things. And when you do, I invite you to take what you learned here today and apply it to the situation. Make a list of things that make you feel overwhelmed and then work through each item on that list, just as I explained in this episode. You will be surprised how much better you can feel when you're empowered with the knowledge that you can do something about a situation and the plan of how to tackle it. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I hope that you will join me again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.